my great pleasure to welcome you today to the Mayoral reception for Southeast Asia. My name is Ariana Dickey. I'm a research fellow in urban sustainability at the University of Melbourne, and I will be your host today. So we'll begin the session with a welcome message from the Honorable Mayor Noraini from Roslin of Subang Jaya in Malaysia, who will set the scene for us around gaps and opportunities for climate action in Southeast Asia. We'll then hear some reflections from the Southeast Asia Regional Curator team on their experience curating the sessions. And finally, we'll go on a virtual tour to the hidden biodiverse edible gardens in Singapore. I'll take this opportunity to direct you all to the knowledge space on the conference website where you can continue the conversation and engage more broadly with the conference themes. We're looking forward to hearing from you on your impressions of the conference and key messages that you're gleaning from them. I also encourage those of you in the audience to engage with the session via Twitter using the hashtag #InnovateForCities and post comments in the chat. So back to this session here. Our first speaker, Mayor Roslin of Subang Jaya. Mayor Roslin was the first woman to be appointed as the mayor of Subang Jaya City Council. She has pledged to make Subang Jaya a smart, safe, healthy, green, woman-friendly, sustainable city by 2030. She is currently the president of the PEM-SEA network of local governments for sustainable coastal development, which produced the Sustainable Development Strategy for the Seas of East Asia, including measures to target pollution reduction and waste management. Mayor Roslin holds a master's in regional planning from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, USA, and a Bachelor of Science, magna cum laude, urban and regional planning from East Carolina University. She was appointed for 8 years as mayor of the Kuala Selangor District Council and Hulu Selangor District Council, and has been serving as the mayor of the Subang Jaya Municipal Council since 2018. Without further ado, I invite the Honorable Mayor Roslin to the stage.
Thank you, Ariana. Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome honorable mayors and city leaders to the Southeast Asia Mayoral reception. I'd like to start off by thanking UN Habitat and the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy for organizing this important conference. At a time that the whole world needs to recover greener or bluer and definitely better, this is the decade of action, and I am so pleased to see in the various conferences sessions the diverse ways cities are playing their part in combating climate change. With Paris Agreement in force and associated commitment of 197 nations around the world, including Southeast Asian cities, to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, governments are beginning to understand the urgency of climate change crisis. However, current national government commitments are not enough. Cities supported by city networks are rising to meet this challenge and are making bold commitment to take action. According to the 2014 assessment report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, urban areas accounted for 71 to 76% of energy related to carbon dioxide emissions. Southeast Asia is one of the most dynamic, fast-growing regions in the world, but with long coastlines, high concentration of population, and economic activity in coastal areas, reliance on agriculture in providing livelihoods for a large segment of the population, especially those living in poverty, and dependence on natural resources and forestry to drive development, it is highly vulnerable to the harsh impact of climate change. As cities in Southeast Asia invest in reducing emission, be it in transport, energy efficiency, building, waste, and the water sector, they have also become increasingly vulnerable to the effect of climate change. Cities are home to the majority of the people, infrastructure, and socio-economic assets that will need to adapt to changing of climate. Hundreds of millions of people in urban areas across the world will be affected by rising sea levels, flood, droughts, storms, health impacts, and the changing temperatures influenced by changing climate. Accounting for trends in declining population densities and continued economic and population growth, urban land cover is projected to expand by between 56 to 301% between the year 2000 and 2030. At the same time, cities are also places of innovation and efficiency, where climate-friendly technologies and practices are often developed, tested, and scaled up. Properly planned and managed, cities in Southeast Asia have the potential to play a key role in our efforts to curb, halt, and reverse climate change and build resilience. UNESCAP has become a focal point in the Asia-Pacific region by coordinating climate actions. At home, using voluntary local review, Subang Jaya 2020 SDG VLR captures the strategies, plans, actions, and allocation that has been prioritized by our city to accelerate its achievement in localizing sustainable development goals. These achievements is an outcome of our long-term commitment to the agenda, as well as the consistency of the City Council in rolling out plans and programs to meet the set targets of the SDG. This VLR report captured the outcomes of the strong commitment and collaboration that it has nurtured over the years. It is my vision to make Subang Jaya's VLR as the first example of integrating both new urban agendas and the sustainable development goals in a systematic approach. Subang Jaya would focus on 7 SDG goals, which are SDG 3, 5, 8, 11, 12, 16, and 13, which is climate action. Ladies and gentlemen, Southeast Asian region is no stranger to natural disasters, such as typhoons in the Philippines and flooding in Jakarta. And like Subang Jaya, I'm sure all of our cities have in some way rolled out our smart disaster management and green city action plan to manage our cities better, leveraging on current technologies. With the availability of smarter and better suited application, the citizen will be able to receive real-time updates for upcoming disaster, which enable us to save life and reduce casualties. Climate action needs collaboration to succeed. As an example, in 2019, carbon dioxide emission level of Subang Jaya city is at about 9.5 million tonnes a year. Therefore, the city is presently undertaking GHG assessment study and to plan strategies toward carbon neutral city by 2030. We can't do it alone without the collaboration of the industry players and households within the city. Southeast Asian cities also need to continuously instill public awareness and behavioral changes among its citizens and actively participate in the reduction of plastic waste. We are well aware of its negative impact on non-renewable resources, greenhouse gases emission, and the danger to life under and above water. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 has caused worldwide disruption for both production and human activity, with some positive consequences for the environment and in terms of GHG emissions. Nevertheless, this positive impact will be countered soon with the reopening of the economy. SDG 13 will face new threats to its progress, especially in Southeast Asia. Can we recover greener or bluer? By using this platform, I would like to encourage guests to engage issues important to this region and to reach out to fellow attendees to generate partnership for change. We have to play an active role in working towards a global solution to climate change and to apply all feasible and economically viable adaptation and mitigation measures to achieve sustainable development goals by 2030. I truly hope that together, cities in Southeast Asia will rise to be the driving force in implementing the Paris Agreement and SDG 13. I call for mayors and city leaders in Southeast Asia to fully embrace our leadership role in implementing sustainable development outcomes and in building partnership for accelerated climate action. Innovate for Cities provide platforms for city leaders and managers to share and gain knowledge, information, and technological solutions that will arm local governments in undertaking climate actions. I am certain that cities will find answers on how we should prioritize what should we do, and how do we finance and scale climate actions in this conference. Thank you and Godspeed.
Thank you so much, Mayor Roslin, for joining us today and for sharing your experiences with Subang Jaya's VLO process, as well as laying out the regional context. It was really great to hear. I particularly liked your emphasis on the not only green, but blue recovery. I hope you have a great day and best wishes. So we'll now move on to a conversation with regional team leader Pareen Hamill to hear about her experience curating the sessions for the region. Pareen is an assistant professor at NTU's Asian School of the Environment and principal investigator at the Earth Observatory of Singapore. She leads the Resilient and Inclusive Cities Lab, where her research group examines how green infrastructure can contribute to creating resilient and inclusive cities in Southeast Asia. So Pareen, first question I'll start off with is, how did you determine the important issues to present from Southeast Asia region?
Thank you, Ariana, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you are logging in from. So thanks for the introduction. And the first question about important issues in the region, I guess you mentioned that my lab, the Resilient and Livable Cities Lab, uses the lens of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions to examine our cities in Southeast Asia. But we do so to address a number of issues associated with the Sustainable Development Goal 11. So issues of inclusiveness, safety, resilience, sustainability. So we essentially use these themes as a start. A lot of these themes, of course, are very similar to many regions, but the ways we frame the questions are different in Southeast Asia. So let me give you an example from a session I moderated yesterday on water and agriculture. And of course, water and food security are very important issues that many cities face around the world. But what one of the speakers highlighted, Stephen Cairns, was that the distinction between urban and rural in Southeast Asia was not as clear as it may be in other countries. So he showed that by using data on population density and data on crop production, if you overlay these data sets, they only intersect in very small patches in Europe. So essentially meaning that people live in cities while food is grown outside cities. In Asia and in Southeast Asia in particular, these overlay of the population and crop are actually much larger swath of land, which means that the realities on the ground where people live, where people grow food, where people need water to grow their food are very different. So this is just like one example of like these food, water, energy nexus exist everywhere, but the realities on the ground are quite different. So just to give a couple of other examples where specific issues for Southeast Asia were highlighted, we also talked about data and data sets available, for example, to do this kind of analysis where we overlay spatial data. And that's also an area where some countries, not all countries are equal in terms of data available and data being accessible. There are a lot of countries pushing for a more open data agenda, but that's not necessarily true everywhere. And it does have implication for what we can do in terms of science-based recommendations for specific places. Perhaps a last example on COVID, which I'm sure has been mentioned in every single session all around the world during the conference. In the same session on water and agriculture, Diana Suharliman, one of our colleagues in Lao, mentioned that for her research, what she looked at was really the migrations from urban to rural, which is not that common due to COVID. And so essentially going back to, for a lot of migrant workers who went back to their countries because they did not have any job in the richer countries where they had migrated, Singapore or Thailand. And so this really highlighted the importance of having a safety net also for these migrant workers back home if some of their families or relatives had some rural activities that they were sustaining over there. So just a few examples that I picked from some of the sessions we organized together with my colleague Jivansh Jain, to show that thematically we are all talking about the same things, that I feel, but it's really important through the process of curating sessions to find the right people, and then in preparing the sessions, really asking the right questions, leveraging the expertise of our speakers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's particularly thinking about the recurrence of food as a theme in some of these sessions that you mentioned, brings me to one of the plenary discussions around, I think Aramar Revi said that it'll be issues of food that lead to the regime change. So whether or not people are able to access that, and the food shortages that will be, caused by climate impacts will be kind of agnostic in their impacts. Everybody will feel it. So the second question I have for you, what are the opportunities from this region for cities and their stakeholders in science, business, and community to accelerate action on climate change?
Yes, vast question. And here, when I was thinking about the answer, I was reminded of a quote from Dave Cheshire in one of our sessions, who was asked by the moderator if he had the opportunity to meet the chair of the COP tomorrow, what would be his one recommendation to give? And he said that he'd leave his spot to Greta Thunberg, which I may actually choose to do as well if I knew the answer. I'm hoping that others would know it and would have implemented it already. But by nature, of course, cities are complex systems, so-called complex systems, and it's the sum of the seemingly small things that will really make a difference. Perhaps one example I would like to, or opportunity I would like to highlight in Southeast Asia is about green finance, and I'm very much hoping to learn more. This afternoon there's a session on green finance where a lot of high-level speakers will share their experience, and I feel it's particularly salient for Southeast Asia, where there's a huge need for new infrastructure and also a growing capacity for green finance, especially in Singapore. So that's a good recipe for developing this green finance sector and funneling some of the new investments to projects that meet both the minimum climate and nature or biodiversity requirements.
Thanks, Perrine. And I'll close off our session with, could you maybe tell us a little bit about some of the lessons that were learned in the process of working across sectors to develop regional sessions that might continue after the conference?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge of all, how to work all together, academics, private sector, public sector, and different disciplines, of course. So if I were to think about new insights that we gleaned from the sessions that I attended, of course, we highlighted the frustrations. I think this often in terms that comes up. Architects think, or planners think too high level, and social scientists would think this way, and natural scientists would think in that way, etc. So that's a given, that's something that's vastly recognized. But we also talked about time availability and time as our very precious resource. And as an academic, and I think a lot of academics would probably disagree with me, but I would argue that we should have more time, or we should make more time to support these cross-sector conversations, but also cross-sector actions. I know a lot of us feel like we don't have this time, and I can certainly, this resonates with me, but I would argue that this is part of our job for those of us working on these societal issues from the academic and research sectors, to facilitate these interactions and to get outside our comfort zone in the murky waters of cross-sectoral work and transdisciplinarity, where sometimes cultural norms may differ, incentives may differ, but that's, at least I see this as part of my job. So just with some of these gems that emerge, I feel like overall we were sometimes preaching to the choir, I would say, in our sessions, and that's perhaps a lesson also that I've learned as a curator and session organizer, that it's very tempting and natural to seek speakers that speak the same language and that are already doing excellent transdisciplinary cross-sectoral work. But what this results in is sessions that are perhaps increasing the size of the echo chamber, but without really getting the word out there. So that's an invitation for all of us, and starting with myself, to be bolder and invite maybe more contrasting points of view in our discussions. So that's an insight I wanted to share also here.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. Just having this discussion together, I was just thinking, I guess I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about what you think is important about taking a regional approach when we're thinking about, a global challenge like climate change.
Yeah, I think as a number of speakers and the mayor already highlighted this, there are some very regional issues and perspectives on what works somewhere, what are the most important hazards as well. And also I would say that the networking, of course, we live in a global world, but it's important also to find allies and role models, mentors in the region that are very likely more aware of these very regional challenges and opportunities to help really build up the work regionally. So perhaps that's also something I wanted to share here. Despite what I just said about preaching to the choir, I feel like for a lot of the sessions that I attended, I was very inspired, and I really enjoyed learning from excellent high-level speakers. And so maybe we're preaching to the choir, but I guess the choir is growing. We're singing in tune, and that's probably a good start also to get other people to pay attention.
Well, thank you very, very much, Corinne. That leaves us with a lot to think about now and what our steps forward are in particular. So we'll now transition to our virtual visit to 2 biodiverse edible gardens in Singapore. In this part of the session, we'll hear from Quy-Phen Pui. Formerly an environmental scientist, Quy-Phen is a climate action advocate, map maker, speaker, life coach, and aspiring placemaker. She's in a life transition and exploring what a purposeful and joyful life can look like in Singapore City. She finds herself having a clearer and deeper connection with nature, geography, and relationships as she learns alongside a value-aligned individuals in her social networks. She balances her energy on nurturing selected ground-up movements and collaborates with fellow food sustainability practitioners to distill knowledge, experience, and original ideas into programs for schools, businesses, and communities. Among her core values are freedom, beauty, detail, meaning, and expression. So with that, I pass over to you, Quy-Phen.
Hi, I'm still in the train station. Give me a couple of minutes if you all can continue your conversations first.
Sure. Well, Preen, we were talking about a bit about this before the session started, but what are some of the other sessions we can look forward to from the Southeast Asian region later on in the conference?
Sure. So I mentioned the session on green finance, which I believe is at 4 p.m., but I must say I will double check with Divansh if that's correct. Otherwise, everyone can find it also on the online program. So very much looking forward to that one. I mentioned high-level speakers, but we also try to emphasize the importance of not using jargon. As mentioned, thank you, Divansh, that's 3:30. Because I feel like a lot of people intuitively sense the importance of green finance, but also don't really know where to start if you're not working in finance yourself to start with. It's quite difficult, or if you have no background in sustainability science or environmental science. And so the goal when we set up the session was really to try and make it very conversational and targeted to a layman audience to really get back to very concrete things, which I'm very much looking forward to. There's another session tonight. That's something I haven't talked about in my remarks, but there are some new innovative tools that are coming online, and I'm talking about serious games, which are really important to really start engaging these conversations. I mentioned this was probably the biggest challenge of all, to make sure people from different sectors, different disciplines can talk to each other in a way that makes the conversation move forward. And these serious games is something that I've looked at in my lab with a colleague who is now in Dublin, and we'll share some of our latest research on serious games for nature-based questions in cities. That doesn't have a regional focus necessarily, but really trying to understand what's the potential of these games. And that's at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, which is a more reasonable time for Europeans. So these are the sessions I'm very much looking forward to. Perhaps you have your favorites, Ariana.
Yes, trying to think of my favorites. What have I attended? Well, I actually heard a really interesting comment that came up in one of my sessions today. I'd never thought of climate change through this frame, but one of the speakers said it was a social issue with environmental impacts. And I found that to be, I don't know, like we have now the science that shows us what's happening and what our trajectory is looking like. And we've kind of come to a point where we realize that even when you communicate those facts, it's no longer really a way to motivate people to take action. So thinking of it now as a social situation for us to work together through collectively, I found to be really powerful.
Yeah.
I could always start now because I'm where the park is.
Sure, that sounds great.
Great. Thanks,
Hello,
Stefan.
everyone. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm playing with my new gimbal that may not work. So we actually had a pre-recorded video, but I thought, if I'm going to sit in the garden, I'm going to come over so that we literally take a walk together to the park, to the garden that I want to introduce everybody to. So right now we are at, let me see whether I can flip the camera. We're at Jurong Central Park. This is a park in Boon Lay in the western end of Singapore, and there's some park visitors here, so I'm not going to take off my mask until I reach my garden. So why am I right now in this park? I'm going to flip the camera again so that you can see what I'm seeing. So why am I in this park? So this park is managed by the National Parks Board Singapore. And the reason why I'm here today is because there was this guy, Mr. Tang. He was a former physics teacher. And a few years ago, he went to Taiwan to learn about natural farming because he felt compelled to do something for the environment. And he was already a dragonfly specialist and a keen nature lover, but he wanted to see what can he do with his hands. So he went to Taiwan and he learned about nature-based gardening. And he came back to Singapore and he went over to schools. He went to factories and he told them that, look, if you have spaces that is underused and it's like a grass patch that is, you don't really know how to deal with it, give it to me and I will help you to turn it into a biodiverse edible garden. So NParks got to know about it. They saw the garden that he's created in the aerospace company So they were telling him, look, we have all these parks in Singapore and we have all these underused grass spaces. And there are some spaces around Singapore that we would really love community to take care of. Like, can you come and help us as a volunteer? So Mr. Tang was like, okay, sure. I've been doing this as a volunteer, but there's only one of me and your parks are very big. So I'm going to invite the rest of my community. So this is where NParks, in particular, actually the Southwest Division, they were very keen to see how they can do this with Mr. Tang and the community. And this community is a Foodscape Collective. It is a very informal network of people, so individuals, social groups, as well as businesses that choose to work together because we share common values and we have common aspirations for how we want to create like a better, healthier food system for all. And through my workings with this community over the last few years, I think the word for all has really transformed a lot, because for me, it was initially about, can we feed people? In Singapore, you'll be surprised that before the pandemic, there were already 1 in 10 Singaporeans that actually needed food help because they don't always have access to regular meals that is also going to be nutritious for them. And so during this pandemic period, it's even worse because a lot of people is actually requiring food help and they are not necessarily what you would consider poor. But also because the community that I hang out with, a lot of them also look at life, nature, or life, not just the bigger animals, but also the microscopic and bacteria, fungi that a lot of us don't think about. And so this very informal network, we have been maybe more aspirational, but this place has been a place where we could finally say that, okay, we advocate for a lot of things. Maybe we advocate that we want to see more permaculture in Singapore. Maybe we advocate for we want more spaces to be cared for by the local community. But we didn't actually have a space to do it. And this was a space that we were invited to actually do something about it. So you see the ponds in front. So these ponds, my understanding when I talk to NParks is that actually normally they don't like to have ponds in their parks because they don't really know what to do with it. But this area, it historically was a very swampy land. Even this tea tree that's in front of me, it's actually a recognition of the land being a swampy area. So the ground is very wet. And so this whole area, you may not notice it, but it's actually shaped like a cup. So this land, even though it's very nice and big, and you might even think that, oh, I would like to come and picnic here, I would like to play my guitar here, people don't come. In fact, the whole park is almost like a hidden space. People don't even remember or know that this park exists, and this park has been here for almost a decade. So when they invited us, they said, Mr. Tang, can you help us to transform this pond? Help us make it into a biodiverse ecosystem because we don't know how to do it. And then because this community that I'm part of, we are very interested in everything that's related to food. They said, why not, this space that is underused, why not you turn it into maybe a biodiverse edible landscape, so that we can really pilot ideas that are new to Singapore, so that we have a space to try out what we want to advocate and see more of in Singapore, and to do that with the local community. So you might see here that we have a bit of a garden now. This is a relatively small garden. It's in a space is much smaller than the actual space that NParks actually invited us to use. And you can see that they say that this is an experimental plot. So the garden that you are looking at right now, this part, this was something that the collective members we created together. Although the invitation was to make use of a much bigger space, we were all coming in as volunteers and we had no funding, no extra resources. So we were like, what could we do? And we decided that a lot of us, we were in between jobs or, life transitions, trying to figure out what to do. So for 4 months, every Tuesday morning, we'll be here. So because Mr. Tang was the person NParks invited, like he became our shifu. or in Chinese, it's actually like your mentor, you know, the teacher that you really want to learn from. So he taught us about nature-based gardening. He taught us his principles, diversity, you know, everything has to be diverse people, diverse plants, diverse food scraps, and also the law of return, like what we take from earth, how do we give it back? So because we started this garden as we don't really know what we wanted to do, but we had this opportunity. So we were just doing this every Tuesday. And we didn't actually go up and tell the neighborhood what we were doing. But because we were here every Tuesday morning, people who were genuinely interested, they actually came up to us on Tuesday mornings. And they would tell us that, hey, you know, I just took leave from school or from work, you know, and I'm going to be late, but I really want to talk to you guys. They wanted to know what we were doing. So we will be telling them, yes, we are growing, you know, plants for the food, for biodiversity. We also telling them that we were creating a different thing. It's very different from the community gardens in Singapore. This is a co-creation. So Mr. Tang may be our mentor, but at the same time, you know, anybody can lead. So he would tell us that, okay, we're going to create this keyhole garden. And this keyhole garden is very special because we want it to be a human gut, or it looks like a human gut. And why? Why is it a human gut? So then everybody, when they understand what is this about, you know, then whoever who is turning up, you get the chance to be a leader. You get the chance to step up and do more. And we were able to do this for 4 months until circuit breaker last year, because at circuit breaker, a lot of us were told, or rather whole Singapore was told, that you cannot travel outside of your neighborhood. And what happens is this garden happens to be on one end of Singapore, and the collective, the people who started this garden, we were all from all over Singapore. Like people would actually travel 2 hours just to be on this garden at 7 a.m. in the morning, because there's this huge chance, this unprecedented chance to really do something in a neighborhood that's so special and so unique. And you can learn from Mr. Tang, which a lot of people want to learn from. But you know, once there's this circuit breaker, like the momentum that we had stopped. So at that time, there were already a few local residents who they understood what we were doing. So they started to take ownership. They started to coordinate amongst themselves. And they started to, you know, say, okay, Monday, I'll be taking care of the watering. Tuesday, somebody maybe go to the mall and see whether there's any food scraps so that we can make compost. So they continued to keep the garden going. But not all of them are necessarily leaders, and not all of them are necessarily gardeners. Some of them just like to hang around here. Some of them love to take photos and share with the rest of the people. And some of them just want to hang out, you know, because there is this very nice supportive sense of a community. So there are people also who are not gardeners, but maybe they say, oh, you know, I can help you to do the trellis. I can help you to do the rainwater harvesting system. So everybody contribute what they can. So after the circuit breaker, like we were not necessarily able to restart the Tuesday sessions because we didn't know how big a group we can actually gather again. It was very nice to be able to gather, because whenever we come here in garden, we wouldn't just learn about gardening, we actually learn about life. Say for example, over here, like when we were transplanting plants, and this watercress actually came from another farm. It was from GUI in the northern part of Singapore. Like Mr. Tang will tell us, like, hey, remember how, you know, when you are transplanted, you know, how do you feel when you were transplanted from one school to another school, or one town to another town? And that's where it goes beyond the act of gardening. It actually connects to yourself, your life. The garden bed looking like a human gut. Like, to me, that's amazing, because it always reminds me how I felt so disconnected from nature, even though I was literally an environmental professional for many years. And I think that I was a nature lover. But now, because I was doing all this and learning with the community about microbes and everything, I start to feel that, yes, you know, finally the environment, the people and the self, they're all connecting. And it makes it all so personal and so important to actually do what you say you believe in, because everything just ties in together. And so the human gut is so important because it reminds me how, you know, the food that we eat, it's like you only have healthy food. That's when you have a healthy body and a healthy mind, and you can be happy and do whatever you want to do. And it's the same for nature. There's so many places around us, all these grasslands. Most of the Singapore is the grasslands are like mini landfills. You dig them up, there's like boots, there's a lot of trash in it. But what we are trying to say is that when you put back like good, healthy living compost and mulch, you know, back into soil, you are actually helping to bring back life into soil, and it can actually become a healthy ecosystem. So in this garden, we don't necessarily care for the individual plants. We won't like try to intervene when the pests come, but we make sure that we try to give it as best a healthy ecosystem as possible, and we let nature be, and we learn with nature. So I think I'm just going to stop talking here, and maybe if Arena or Perrine can help me to check for questions.
Thank you very much, Kuifen, for that tour through the garden. I've put in the chat for anybody who, the audience here, if you want to put in questions for Kuifen, I will happily read them out to her. But in the meantime, while we wait for some questions to come in, I want to point out that at a time when travel feels like such a distant memory, it was a treat to be taken around this garden in Singapore. I really feel like I've been transported there. So thank you for bringing your gimbal to take us on the tour.
Welcome. The gimbal is just like doing its own thing. If this was in the morning, the flowers would be so pretty. This is the wing pot purslane. I love how when we grow all these plants and people don't know them, that I was so surprised that they are edible, they are good for biodiversity, and it's so wonderful to have them in the landscape.
Kuifen, would it be possible to show the tour of the other garden now, or is that not feasible with your current setup?
No, so I think I emailed you that because of our busy schedules here, it's not possible to do the other garden, because my original plan was to be at the other garden, and it's just simply not possible. That's why it's only one garden today. But I hope you find this session useful, and please ask me, because there's a lot of things I can talk about in this place.
Yeah, so you actually touched on human health in relation to urban nature, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that. You know, it's spoken a lot about what green space in the city does for contributing to water sensitive urban design and for reducing air pollution and also mental well-being. But the fact that you're now also talking about the edible component and the gut health, I thought that was very interesting. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the human health contributions of these edible gardens.
Yeah, I think all too often, for example, right now in Singapore, they are focusing a lot about let's grow more food. And maybe some of the indoor farmers or high-tech farms, or rather everybody, they might say that, okay, the food is very nutritious, for you, and it's very flavorful. But what does that actually mean? What do we actually know about or care about? And I think even after being 7 years in this journey with the collective, where we were looking at food and sustainability and how to do that in Singapore, like I really honestly cannot do a workshop and tell people about how do you eat so that you have good gut health. I think it's possible to share bits and pieces, but it's not been integrated enough for myself. But I think the good thing of, for example, this garden and also the the mentoring that Mr. Tang had with a lot of us, is that, well, he would teach us what makes a food nutrition dense. And he would teach us that it's very much related to the quality of your soil, the life of your soil, and how the life of your soil actually helps you to make sure that your plant is healthy, is the food that you harvest is nutrition dense, and how to tell as a layperson. So quite a few of us, we actually got those garlic presser and also those reflectometer that I was using in secondary school. And maybe it's not the most scientific thing, but he was actually telling us to see, compare for ourselves. If you buy the same veggie in the supermarket and the ones that you grow, and you know that you put in like good soil and good compost, what's the difference? So quite a few of them have been testing out just using the very simple refractometer method, looking at bricks. And, you can actually just have a very lay person point of view of, is the food that you buy actually of better quality?
We have a question from Farine. Thank you first for sharing your passion. And also, could you elaborate on a bit on the different types of community gardens in Singapore?
Yeah, okay. My gimbal stopped working, so I'm going to try to make this as horizontal as I can. So there are many different types of community gardens. I would not call this a community garden. I realized that it is not a good thing when you're trying to change mindsets. So in Singapore, there is what we call the Community in Bloom community garden. And those are the gardens that are registered with NParks. And people often think that if they are registered by NParks will give you money and training and leadership and everything. It doesn't happen. So a lot of people who actually want to set up a NParks community garden, they are very surprised when it doesn't happen. So these community gardens, they tend to be registered, or actually it's not tend to be, the system is such that you have to register under an organization. So even if you have 10 neighbors who want to do it together, an organization has to register it on your behalf. And it normally is maybe your resident committee of your estate. And they may not actually agree with you. So that on the ground, there's a lot of issues because because the gardeners may not even agree with the organization that is registering the garden and many, many other things. In fact, actually in this park, just now I walked by another garden that is a Community in Bloom garden. It has no organization that is registered to it, and it's an outlier. And it has its own story. And I actually think that that own story is actually a reflection of how Singapore works. It's very interesting because the organizations, normally they want to ensure that their gardens is in their own constituencies or their own area of management. And just now when I was taking the leaf, and that's where I was not speaking, the leaf and the road area was actually like the boundary of the constituency. So even though people were living just across the road and people actually want gardens, none of the resident committees actually wanted this garden in the park, which is the other garden that I did not bring you to. So then there's another type of community gardening in Singapore, and that's the elopement gardening. That is where people pay like $50 for their own rectangular plot. And it's a balloting system. And the interesting thing is, say for example, if the elopement garden is in Boon Lay, which is in the western end of Singapore, anybody around Singapore can bid for that plot. So you can stay in the eastern end and you can still successfully bid for it, because the current system is that it is seen as fair. Anyone in Singapore can bid for a plot. But it doesn't work on the ground again, because the person in the east may never come down to the west just to water some plants. So then this garden here is actually the third kind. And why I say it's the third kind is because the guy who invited us to work on this space, to them, this is part of their own project. It is not community in Bloom Garden. So it's not a registered garden. But this is an invitation to say, okay, this whole space that was around me is under use. And the people do not even know that this park exists. How can we transform like 1/5 of the park so that people will love this space? They will come here for mentorships programs. They might want to come for storytelling. They will come for music. They want to come for dance. And how do you do that? And for us, because when the invitation came, it was, there's Mr. Tang and he's the gardener. It's just easier to start by digging. So we started a little garden. But, if we have the opportunity to continue to do more, and if we have the resources, what can we do here? So a lot of us, or rather a few of us, we are thinking of how do we continue this? How do we pivot? How do we truly make this meaningful for everyone involved, so that if we do this voluntarily again, or how do we not burn out? And if we get funding for it, how can we do this so that we can truly transform the whole space?
Wonderful, Quy Phan. I actually wanted to ask did you still want to play the video and do the self-narration over that?
Well, not really, because that video is actually this garden, but 5 months ago. And because I was traveling 3 MRT stations away, I don't have my laptop ready. So you would have to wait like a lot more minutes for that to happen.
No, that's totally fine. Well, how about we have one more question and then we'll wrap up the session. One more question for you. So how difficult is it to promote for the edible and community gardens in Singapore, especially in a land scarce city? Was it easy to convince local authorities?
Actually, there's no convincing needed. It's just been very interesting. It's depending on who you talk to. So when it comes to community gardens, they want more community gardens. If you want to grow food, they want more food to be grown. And if you talk to communities, if you can help them to set up the garden and make it so much easier that people don't keep asking like, how do you even start a community garden? People want a community garden. And then there's also the land authority. When I talked to them, they were like, oh, there's all these community spaces around Singapore that's under the land authority, but nobody is using the land. So then they were like asking me, why is nobody using the land? And then I'm like, we don't even know that you have land that we can use. And even if we know that there's land, like, how do you apply? Because there are maybe a lot of places that say, okay, this is SLA land, it's state land, there's a signboard. But a lot of people know that, yes, I can play football. But beyond football, which is very transient, how can we really say that, okay, maybe we have this whole big space and maybe there's going to be a social enterprise, or maybe there's going to be a charity that helps to manage this space, but how can the local community really transform the space, learn from it, and care for it, so that they this becomes the pride of the neighborhood,
and making it multifunctional too. That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and again, thank you for taking us on that lovely tour through the gardens. It did really feel like a trip for those of us who are all turning in virtually. So thanks to Quy Phan, and thank you also for your reflections today, Perrine. It was great to hear from you. And last but certainly not least, to the Honorable Mayor Roslyn. It was a pleasure to have you as part of our session today. And thank you to the audience who've joined in. Wish you all of the best, and please do enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.